Okay, so like I was saying in class, the names of the government of the French Revolution or the government itself changes a lot. So unlike US history where we basically go from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, we have to remember that, this is one revolutionary nature of this period. They can't seem to come up with a government that really is going to function for them. So the next government, we already talked about the National Assembly, the next government that we need to look at is the Legislative Assembly. So at this point, the Legislative Assembly is a completely new group of legislators, right? So they replace the National Assembly, and this happens after the National Assembly disbands. And one of the things that also makes it revolutionary, so to speak, is that the members of the National Assembly, before they disbanded, agreed that no one in the Legislative Assembly should should have been part of the old National Assembly. So in other words, they agreed that no one in that group, in the old group in the National Assembly, would take part in this new government. Um, so this kind of shows us also that the revolutionary government is kind of breaking up into factions. We know how in American government, a lot of the founders were afraid of factions and kind of how they could tear the government apart. We're going to see how that exact thing kind of happens during the French Revolution. Um, so the members of the Legislative Assembly are much younger and also kind of less cautious than the members of the National Assembly. So they're willing to make sort of drastic changes to the government and not necessarily reflect upon the potential consequences. So the National Assembly members, you could say, were much more stable, and the Legislative Assembly members, some of them were thinking about getting rid of the monarch altogether. Remember how the National Assembly members were more in favor of a constitutional monarchy, which was a little bit less of a change. And so the two major groups that we need to look at right now, we'll look at a few more in the future. Actually, they kind of overlap with one another. The large umbrella group is the Jacobins. So they are a political club, and they come to dominate the Legislative Assembly. So they actually, we're going to see, are a little bit more moderate than the subset of the Jacobins, which are the Girondins. So again, the Girondins are part of the Jacobins, and they are the more leftist or advanced group in the Legislative Assembly. We're also going to see that it's the Girondins who push for war. So for the revolutionary government to go against the other countries that we're going to see are going against them. So they're very passionately committed to a liberal revolution. All right, so I just said war. That's something that we need to keep in mind for this new revolutionary period. At this point, foreign countries, and this is very much encouraged by the émigrés. We talked about them earlier. Um, other countries are going to start to feel threatened by the French Revolution, and they're going to try to figure out a way to band together and stop the revolution from spreading. Okay, of course, the Girondins, the more leftist group within the Legislative Assembly, is going to do just the opposite. They are going to be trying to spread the revolution past France. They think the only way it can be successful is if it continues to grow. One of the first actions against the French government we're going to see is the Declaration of Pillnitz. Now, this is issued by Austria and Prussia, and what they want to do is they want to fight the revolutionary government. Now remember that Marie Antoinette is from Austria, right? So she in particular is feeling very threatened by the French revolutionary government, and Austria wants to protect the monarchy. And so we're going to see how this declaration is going against the revolutionary government. The émigrés, just like I mentioned earlier, they were, remember, French nobles who flee France beginning in 1789. They don't like when the revolution starts to take a more radical turn. So they, now living in countries like Prussia and Austria, are pushing other countries to do something to restore the monarchy and to stop the French Revolution. Okay, so we're going to see in Austria in particular, the emperor at that time is Leopold. He says, partly because of the émigrés' influence, that he would be willing to take military steps to restore order in France. But he wanted all other powers to join him, so he didn't want it to just be Austria alone. So Austria and Prussia do forge an alliance here. But Leopold actually did not expect to receive a ton of support from all these other countries. He just kind of thought that the Declaration of Pillnitz would kind of calm the revolutionary sentiment in France without actually declaring war. So, I mean, basically, what that means is that the Declaration of Pillnitz you could see as kind of a bluff, trying to slow down the revolution and also for him to get the emigres off his back. But really, Leopold kind of misjudges, first off, how kind of passionate the revolutionary sentiment is in France. And so, if anything, after the Declaration of Pillnitz is issued, we see the revolutionary government is going to become kind of stronger against these foreign countries. So they feel very threatened by the Declaration of Pillnitz. Um, so actually, the declaration, which in a lot of ways was meant to prevent war, ends up resulting in war. So by April of 1792, the Legislative Assembly declares war on Austria. Okay, and again, this is kind of fueled by their anti-Austrian sentiment. They feel like Austria is kind of collaborating with the king and queen of France to stop the revolution. We're going to see again the Girondins are kind of, they're the party that's leading the way in this war. Um, so the first war that we need to talk about is the War of the First Coalition. And we'll actually mention this a little bit later as well. Okay, so what we see is that France is actually at war with most of Europe. So, in other words, that means that many European countries are intimidated by what's happening in France. Remember in the previous video, we were talking about Edmund Burke's conservative reaction against the revolution. It's not just Edmund Burke. We see a lot of countries that are not very happy with what's taking place in France. So an easy acronym to remember the areas that are at war with France is SHAPES. Okay, so it's Spain, Holland, Prussia, England, and Sardinia. All right, they all oppose the French revolutionary government. And at first, we're going to see France is not very successful in their wars against foreign countries. All right, so in the War of the First Coalition, the French revolutionary forces are going to be soundly defeated by the Austrian military. Um, and there's a difference between being defeated and being completely overtaken, right? Austria doesn't control France after this period, right? So the country's not taken over, and a lot of this is because remember the division of Poland? We talked about that during the age of absolutism in Eastern Europe. This kind of serves as a distraction, and this prevents France from being completely lost to foreign powers. All right, now the Jacobins, especially the Girondins within them, feels that the defeat in this war is all Louis XVI's fault. They think he's part of a conspiracy with Prussia and Austria. So Prussia and Austria go ahead and issue this thing called the Brunswick Manifesto, which threatens to destroy Paris if the royal family is harmed. Because at this point, you know, remember that Louis and Marie Antoinette had been taken from Versailles to Paris. They were in the Tuileries, kind of prisoners. After the flight to Varennes, Louis was seen as a traitor, so his life is very much kind of in question. So basically, you know, these foreign powers are scared that they're going to do something, that the revolutionary government is actually going to harm the king. So that's why they issue the Brunswick Manifesto. But the Jacobins do not respond very well to this. They start to kind of rise up in powerful mobs, and they seize power in Paris. All right, and this is also remember that a lot of these there are a lot of leaders to the revolution that kind of write pamphlets, that give speeches, that ultimately kind of incite some of the more radical members of the revolution to do things like, you know, rise up in an angry mob. And so the leaders in this kind of reaction to the Brunswick Manifesto were Robespierre, who we're going to talk about much more, Georges-Jacques Danton, as well as Jean-Paul Marat, who we already talked about because he sort of encouraged the Women's March on Versailles. Um, Okay, so the Tuileries, that Paris where, or Paris, sorry, the palace where Louis the XVI is staying at this point is actually stormed by this mob, and they take the king prisoner. All right, because ultimately they can't trust the king anymore. This shows us that the monarchy is all but dead at this point. They also, when they're taking the king prisoner, they actually murder the people that are guarding the Tuileries. They were called the Swiss Guard. And this is seen as the period of the marking of the Second Revolution. All right, again, the revolution kind of comes in stages, and this is seen as a much more radical stage of the revolution. The earlier stage with the National Assembly, we could see as much more moderate because they wanted a constitutional monarchy. When they storm the Tuileries and kill the Swiss Guards, this shows us that they don't want a monarchy anymore, so we're turning in a more radical direction. Okay, then they set up their own government for Paris. All right, remember that these mobs kind of take over Paris, seize it. They don't want, of course, they don't want Louis the XVI to play any role in the government. So what is done is a Paris Commune is formed, and this is led by the most radical members of the revolutionary government. All right, so they set up this revolutionary radical municipal government in Paris, and it basically usurps the power of the Legislative Assembly. And this is because, remember how I was saying that the Legislative Assembly is a little bit more radical than the National Assembly? Well, the leaders of the Paris Commune thought that the Legislative Assembly was not radical enough. All right, one of the figures that I just mentioned, Georges-Jacques Danton, becomes the leader of the Paris Commune. All right, and here's what they do that's more revolutionary. They get the Legislative Assembly to suspend the Constitution of 1791. They also order new elections. And this time the elections are based on universal male suffrage. Remember how the previous elections were just about half of the male population over 25? Now they're going to try to extend the vote to as basically the entire male population. And they want to summon a new government, a new national convention, to give France a republican form of government. All right, so again, a republic implies that there is no longer a monarch, or a monarch is no longer necessary. In other words, they feel that in order to have the republic be born, for a birth of the republic, the death of the king is necessary. Okay, last thing to talk about in this slide is the September massacres. All right, so this again shows us how violent this second revolution really is. Um, now, of course, because the Paris Commune is very revolutionary and violent in its own right, they are very afraid that someone may try to stop them. And so there are rumors spread that there are counter-revolutionary forces in Paris that are plotting with foreign invaders to try to stop the Paris Commune. Now, this is kind of ridiculous because a lot of these counter-revolutionary people are already in prison at this point, but nonetheless, it strikes enough paranoia among the Paris Commune that they end up slaughtering all these people that are in prison. A lot of them are priests, they're bourgeoisie, they're aristocrats. So basically, anyone who opposes the program of the Paris Commune ends up being killed. All right, so and you're going to see a lot of the people the countries that previously supported the revolution, especially the United States. Remember how they were allies with France during their own revolution? We're going to see that once the revolution in France takes a really violent turn, other countries are going to start to turn against them. All right. This also shows us that the exact thing that Edmund Burke predicted, that things were going to become anarchistic, is happening. Okay, and this is only the beginning. Next section, we're going to talk about the Reign of Terror, which is really where anyone who threatens to challenge any of the ideas of the French Revolution can be killed. And this is expedited by this new invention, the guillotine. Okay, so we'll pick up with that next time.